Hi, this is Judy Shintani from Foothill College. I'm going to be talking about Art Nouveau and Alfonso Mucha today. Let's look at some slides. Okay, so Art Nouveau was a movement that was happening between 1890 and 1905. It touched on decorative and graphic arts and architecture throughout Europe and beyond. Artists drew inspiration from both organic and geometric forms evolving in elegant designs. The movement was committed to abolishing the traditional hierarchy of the arts. It paved the way for the development of Art Deco in the 1920s. The function of an object should dictate its form. That was one of its theories. It experienced a popular revival in the 1960s and is now seen as an important predecessor, if not an integral component of modernism. There are two distinct influences in Art Nouveau. In 1880, the British arts and crafts movement um, was a big influence. It was a reaction against the colored designs and compositions of the Victorian era decorative art. In 1880 to 1890s, Japanese art, particularly woodblock prints, swept up many European artists. It contained floral and bulbous forms and quote unquote the whiplash curve, all key elements of what would eventually become Art Nouveau. Claire Driscoll for Tiffany Studios in New York was an important woman artist. The table lamps were some of the most famous Art Nouveau items produced by the Lewis Comfort Tiffany's firm. The model number 342, commonly called Wisteria, is one of the most prized. Lamps were influenced by the Impressionism and Japonism, and wisteria are native to both the eastern United States, where Tiffany was based, and to China, Japan, and Korea. Clara Driscoll was the head of the Tiffany Studios women's glass cutting department and creator of over 30 of the company's famed lamps, including Daffodil, Dragonfly, and Peony models. It was an important moment for women designers at the turn of the century who were put in charge of a significant sector of the firm's production. Driscoll commanded $10,000 a year as one of the highest paid women of her time until she was required to leave Tiffany Studios when she got married in 1909. This is an example of the Tiffany lamps. Um, let's look at a video.
The wisteria is one of the most recognizable, beloved, and celebrated lamps created at the Tiffany Studios. Tiffany marketed his lamps as both articles of utility and objects of art, and certainly the wisteria is the embodiment of those two principles. Regardless of whether it was lit or unlit, the boldly colored purple glass and solid bronze base would announce its presence in any room. This lamp was designed by a woman named Clara Driscoll, who was the manager of the women's glass cutting department at the Tiffany Studios. She oversaw a small team of women known as the Tiffany Girls. Driscoll and some of her colleagues were responsible for designing many of Tiffany's most famous lampshades. Tiffany believed that women had a superior sense of color, which made them better glass selectors, and that their small fingers made them more readily able to handle the tiny pieces of glass required for many of the little lampshades. The wisteria lamp is a case in point. The design includes just under 2,000 tiny pieces of glass, and each piece of glass had to be selected, cut, wrapped in copper foil, and soldered together. It's no wonder that this was one of the most expensive lamp models that the Tiffany Studios produced. In 1906, it retailed for a whopping $400. That may not sound like a lot of money to us today, but considering that you could purchase a lamp for $1 in 1906, this was obviously a luxury object. Look at the flowers. They're very uniform in color and shape. How to select glass in such a way that you can make out individual blossoms, that the design isn't static or just downright boring. It took great skill and great patience to successfully select a wisteria lampshade. In a letter to her family, Clara Driscoll recounted a disastrous event that occurred while the Tiffany girls were working on a rush order of wisteria shades. She writes, The wisteria lamps were in an awful rush, and the girls were going to work overtime in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, a most tragic thing happened. The scrubwoman was cleaning the floor under the easel when she suddenly decided to get up. Of course, she took the whole easel with her, and immediately the work of 4 girls for 6 days was in about 9,000 pieces over the floor in an undistinguishable heap. The catastrophe was so great that there was not even a word of regret. About 6 of us fell to work without a word to repair damages. As for the scrubwoman, she looked around in a dazed way for a minute and then calmly went on scrubbing, the only untroubled and carefree person in the room. It was possible to save most of it, but an awful piece of work to find the place of each little piece.
Okay, let's lastly talk about Alfonso Mucha. He was a Czech artist who lived from 1860 to 1939. He was a painter, an illustrator, a graphic designer, and lived in Paris during the Art Nouveau period. He was best known for his distinctly stylized and decorative theater posters of Sarah Bernhardt. From 1912 to 1926, he returned to his homeland and devoted himself to painting a series of 20 monumental canvases known as the Slav epic, depicting the history of all the Slavic people of the world. So that the 3 different areas of the Slavic people were the East Slavics, which included those living in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, the West Slavs, which included those living in Czech Republic, Poland, and Slovakia, and the South Slavs, which are the people who lived in Bosnia, Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, and Slovenia. These are the most amazing paintings I've seen, and we'll be taking a look at those. From the 1928, on the 10th anniversary of the independence of Czechoslovakia, he presented the series to the Czech nation and is now on display in the National Gallery in Prague. He didn't like thinking of himself as an Art Nouveau artist, but was most proud of his historical paintings. Okay, let's look at some video.
This is Alphonse Mucha. Not only was he a great Art Nouveau artist, he was also my great-grandfather. My name's Tamsin Omond, and I'm a writer, activist, and performer. And recently I've become fascinated by the relationship between my great-grandfather and Sarah Bernhardt, one of the most influential figures in his long and successful career. In 1895, Mucha had been living in Paris for 7 years. He lived in cheap lodgings, sharing studio space with other artists. Sarah Bernhardt was a supremely successful Parisian actress. She was an international star. Boxing Day, 1894, and Mucha was doing a favor for a friend, correcting proofs in the workshop of Le Mercier. Now, Sarah Bernhardt urgently called Le Mercier because she needed a poster for her production of Gismonde. Even though Mucha had never produced a poster before, Le Mercier asked whether he could do it, and within a week. Mucha's poster of Gismonde was first posted on the streets of Paris on New Year's morning, 1895. It was an immediate success. The posters plastered across the city became objects of desire for collectors. Poster design was incredibly popular in Paris at the time. But Mucha's posters were different. He presented his figure in a long, narrow shape with a single female form. And instead of the bright and jarring colours that other poster artists were using, he chose a more subtle palette. The overall effect was one of dignity and sobriety. Bernhardt was thrilled. Over the next 4 years, Mucha produced 6 posters for Sarah Bernhardt, each of these in his easy-to-distinguish style. The long female form, the halo, and the distinctive font created a sort of brand that Sarah Bernhardt became known by, and this contributed to her international success. Mucha's posters delved deep into the characters that Sarah sought to portray. Instead of showing realistic representations of the actress, he chose to focus on the inner psyche and most important attributes of the character. Mucha's relationship with Sarah Bernhardt propelled him onto the international stage. The posters he designed for her captured the spirit of the times, this exciting new style of Art Nouveau. His posters democratized the style, literally bringing it down onto the streets and placing Sarah Bernhardt at the center of this exciting new movement. When I think about the relationship between Sarah Bernhardt and my great-grandfather, I'm so inspired by the way that they inspired each other. Their relationship truly was one of respect, of creativity, and of beauty.
One artist had a decisive influence on the poster artwork of the French Art Nouveau, the Czech painter Alphonse Mucha, who was born in 1860.
Well, Mucha lived for more than 20 years in Paris as a bachelor.
No idea seemed impossible at the time. If Mucha could have shortened the Eiffel Tower by 2/3, tourists to Paris would be able to photograph this Mucha building today.
And so it was extremely avant-garde in one sense, but at the same time you had a tremendous amount of interest in symbolist art, symbolist painting, and with it went interest in Freemasonry, talking to the dead. Mucha was absolutely fascinated by the occult.
After 20 years, he turned his back on Paris forever. He just wanted to be a painter. He wanted to paint a gigantic epic for his people. The pictures were hidden from the Nazis in 1937 and only rediscovered by the Mucha family 25 years later.
No, it was rolled up and hidden, and that probably saved it after all. But at the end of the war, nobody knew where these enormous canvases were.
Mucha arranged the themes of the Slav epic so that 10 of the canvases are devoted to Czech topics, and the other 10 to other Slavic culture.
The cycle of paintings was divided into 4 themes: culture, allegory, religion, and military.
We need to re-examine Alphonse Mucha, and there's no better place to do it than with the Slav epic. And we need to understand 2 things. The first is that he is not primarily a decorative artist.
Once again, this is Judy Shintani from Foothill College. Thanks for joining me today to learn about Art Nouveau and Alfonso Mucha. See you next week.